Hey, it's Professor Gugis here, and we're going to talk a little bit today about the lessons of violence in our media environment. Much like pornography, violence isn't just a story about people hitting each other or shooting each other or doing whatever people do when they commit acts of violence. Okay? What violence is a storytelling tool. It's a way of communicating ideas, and as your reading points out, it's a very effective way of communicating ideas to a large group of people. The reason that we're interested in looking at violence here is because of the messages that violence in our mediated environment tells us about gender, power, and authority. Basically, to skip to the conclusion, violence tells us who should be in charge and why. Always it comes down to who's best suited to be in charge. So let's talk a little bit about our basic violent narrative. Okay, the as we talked about as we saw in our readings, most of the violence is committed by men in our media environment. We'll talk about superheroes, we'll talk about action adventure heroes. What we see is that women are limited to committing violence under very narrow circumstances. And basically, it's two. The first one is if a man tells them to do it, or if they're part of a team headed by a man, totally okay. The other one is if they are protecting something that needs nurturing and caregiving. And the interesting thing about that kind of violence is that it is acceptable because the woman who is committing the violence is doing so in a way that's consistent with the broader stereotypes about about femininity in our media environment. Think about it. They're being subservient to men, or they are playing the role of nurturer and caregiver. As far as the object of sexual desire goes, take a look at your list of female superheroes and tell me most of them, if that whole superhero thing doesn't work out for them, tell me they couldn't be models. Okay, so most of the violence is committed by men, ordered by men, sanctioned by men, directed by men. Okay, so if we start from that premise, then we are able to start to understand a little bit about the message of gender in our media environment. Okay, mediated violence isn't, like I said, isn't just random people hitting each other. Mediated violence that is acceptable, the formula that we use for mass media messages, big movie studios, that sort of thing, okay, usually require the male in charge, the male who is committing violence, to have three basic understandings. Okay? The first one is that they have to know who to kill. They have to be able to recognize the plot, and then they go out and they go commit violence against that person. The movies where the good guy doesn't know who the bad guy is usually aren't very satisfying. Okay? I mean, and I'm talking all the way through. There's always a point where they recognize who the bad people are. You, the audience, you're usually told fairly early on, but eventually the good guy finally figures out who the bad guy is. So they've got to know what the problem is, and they've got to be able to come up with a plan to address that problem. Okay. Number two, they have to be moral. They have to be ethical. Okay. And number three, they have to be courageous. Now remember, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And we're able to illustrate why these ideas work by looking at the hypothetical movie that doesn't have any of these elements. Okay, if the protagonist, the good guy, the hero, is a complete moron who doesn't understand what's going on, who is not intelligent, then it's really easy for the bad guy to fool that person, right? And if the hero, the protagonist, isn't bright enough to at least catch on enough that something's gone wrong and figure out a way to solve it, then the bad guy wins. Okay? Here comes your superhero bashing through the door. Dr. Evil says, there's an even worse bad guy than me, and he's down there at the bottom of that lake of acid. And the hero goes, I'll go get him instead. Well, the movie's over in about 3 minutes, right? And the bad guy wins. Okay? If the hero is not brave and courageous, okay, here comes your hero through the door. I'm here to save the day, Dr. Evil, your days are over. And Dr. Evil says, I've got a gun and I pointed at you. And the superhero goes, ah, and runs out the other. Movie's over, okay? I hope you're enjoying this because I'm having a ball. And number 3, think about this. Think about if the superhero is morally bankrupt, completely unethical, right? So here he comes bashing through the door, grabs Dr. Evil, slams him up against the wall. All right, Dr. Evil, your nefarious plan to take over the world is over. Your days of being a bad guy are over. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And Dr. Evil goes, I was going to make about $45 billion on this deal. I'll give you half of it. And the good guy, the hero, goes, all right, so how are we going to transfer this money? Are we going to do it cash? Are we going to do US dollars? Are we going to do bullion? Are we going to do Bitcoin? Let's go. I got some yachts to buy. Movie doesn't work very well, right? So, to sum this up very briefly, the superhero, the action-adventure hero, the good guy, is usually intelligent, moral, and courageous. They have to be intelligent enough to figure out what to do. They have to be moral enough to resist temptation. And they have to be courageous enough to do the right thing even when they don't want to. Okay? Why is this important? Well, because we link it to the fact that it's mostly men doing this. That's why I'm using the word guy in this discussion. So the message of violence in our media environment is that men are intelligent, men are moral, and men are courageous. Those are the 3 messages that we get from our exposure to the mass commercial media. Okay? And why do we care about this? Because think about it. Intelligence, morality, and courage. Those are not just the characteristics you want in a superhero. They're not just the characteristics you want in an action-adventure hero. They're not the characteristics you only want in your real-world personnel, your real-world characters, your real-world people who are in positions of authority. You want those in all positions of authority, not just the ones that involve violence. In other words, you don't just want the commander-in-chief or your police chief to be intelligent, moral, and courageous. I want my doctor to be intelligent, moral, and courageous. I want the person who watches my dogs when I'm out. I want them to be intelligent, moral, and courageous. I want my teachers to be intelligent, moral, and courageous. I want my religious leaders to be intelligent, moral, and courageous. So in other words, intelligence, morality, and courage are leadership qualities, and violence in our media environment links those qualities to men. I'm Professor Michael Gugis. Thanks for listening.